Part 1. The Fire Beyond Black Pine Ridge. The first scream didn't come from the forest. It came from the radio after the voices disappeared. Before we begin, if you love true wilderness horror stories that make you double-check your locks at night, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me the creepiest thing you've ever heard in the woods. Now let's get into tonight's story. Ethan Mercer had spent most of his adult life trying to prove that fear was just a chemical reaction. At 32, he worked as a freelance wildlife photographer, drifting from state to state capturing remote places most people avoided. The deeper and more isolated the location, the better the photos sold online. He had climbed frozen cliffs in Alaska, slept beside crocodile-infested rivers in Louisiana, and once survived 3 nights stranded in the Nevada desert after his truck broke down. But Black Pine Ridge unsettled him before he even arrived. The place sat deep inside the northern Montana wilderness, hours away from the nearest town. The forests there were old, older than roads, older than maps. Locals described the region like it was alive. "You can camp there," one gas station clerk warned him, "but don't stay after the fires start." Ethan laughed at the comment. "What fires?" The man didn't smile back. "You'll know when you see them." That should have been enough to make him reconsider. Instead, it made him curious. 3 days later, Ethan parked his dusty Jeep beside a narrow dirt trail leading into Black Pine Ridge. The afternoon air smelled of pine sap and rain-soaked earth. Towering trees blocked most of the sunlight, making the woods look darker than they should have been. He checked his equipment carefully: camera gear, lanterns, batteries, satellite radio, bear spray, hunting knife, food packs, and a small revolver he rarely touched. Then he started hiking. By sunset, he found a clearing beside a narrow creek and set up camp. The silence around him felt strange. Not peaceful, empty. No birds. No insects. No distant animal calls. Just wind moving through trees. Ethan tried ignoring it. He cooked canned stew over a portable stove and reviewed photos from earlier in the day. The forest looked beautiful through the lens. Ancient trees. Thick fog between the branches. Long shadows stretching across untouched earth. Still, something bothered him. Every photo he took deeper in the woods seemed darker than it should have been. At first he blamed the lighting. Then he noticed shapes. Tall figures hidden between the trees. Not clear enough to identify, but always there. Watching. He zoomed into one image until the pixels blurred. The figure appeared impossibly thin. Its arms looked too long. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Ethan stared at the photo for several seconds before convincing himself it was just distorted tree bark. That night, rain began falling around midnight. Soft at first, then heavier. Ethan lay inside his tent listening to water hit the canvas above him. He was just beginning to fall asleep when the satellite radio crackled beside him. Static. Then a voice. "Don't let them see the fire." Ethan immediately sat upright. "Hello?" Nothing. Only static again. He grabbed the radio and checked the signal frequency. No active channels nearby. Then the voice returned. This time it sounded terrified. "If you see lights between the trees, run." The transmission cut off violently. Ethan waited several minutes, gripping the radio tightly. He tried responding again, but there was no answer. Probably interference, he thought. Maybe another hiker. Maybe a damaged frequency tower. But deep down he didn't believe that. Outside, the rain suddenly stopped. Complete silence swallowed the forest. Then came the smell. Smoke. Ethan frowned and slowly unzipped the tent. The woods beyond his campsite glowed faint orange. At first he thought it was wildfire. But the light moved. Dozens of flickering orange lights drifted silently between the trees in the distance. Like people carrying torches. Ethan stepped outside carefully, heart beginning to pound. "Hello?" he called. No response. The lights continued moving. There had to be at least 20 of them. He reached for his flashlight, but paused. The lights weren't casting shadows. That realization hit him like ice water. Real fire creates movement. Smoke. These lights floated silently through the darkness without illuminating the forest around them. Ethan backed away slowly. Then one of the lights stopped moving. It turned toward him. And suddenly the glow revealed a figure beneath it. Tall. Unnaturally tall. Its limbs bent wrong. Its face looked smooth and pale, almost featureless except for 2 dark holes where the eyes should have been. Ethan froze. The thing tilted its head. Then another figure emerged beside it. Then another. Dozens. Standing silently between the trees. Watching him. The radio exploded with static behind him. A screaming voice burst through the speaker. "Don't let them reach the campfire." At that exact moment, Ethan realized something horrifying. The creatures weren't staring at him. They were staring at the small fire pit beside his tent. And slowly, they began walking toward it. Ethan stumbled backward and grabbed the lantern, panic flooding through his chest. The figures moved faster. Not running, gliding. Their bodies twisting unnaturally as they crossed between the trees. The nearest one entered the edge of the clearing. And Ethan finally saw its face clearly. Its mouth stretched from ear to ear, filled with human teeth. The lantern slipped from Ethan's hand and shattered against the rocks. Darkness swallowed the campsite instantly. Then the screaming started in the woods around him. And it wasn't human. End of part 1. Part 2, The Things That Fear Fire. Ethan ran blindly through the darkness. Branches whipped across his face as he stumbled between trees, the screams echoing from every direction. They sounded wrong, like human voices stretched into something animalistic. Behind him, the creatures moved fast. Too fast. He could hear them sliding across the forest floor instead of running. No footsteps. No breathing. Just the wet scraping sound of limbs dragging through leaves. Ethan forced himself not to look back. His flashlight bounced violently in his shaking hand as he sprinted downhill through the woods. Rainwater soaked the ground beneath him, making every step dangerous. Then the screaming stopped. Instantly. The silence hit harder than the noise. Ethan slowed for half a second, chest heaving violently. That was when he realized the forest around him had changed. The trees were blackened. Burnt. Massive trunks stood twisted and cracked like charred bones. Ash covered the ground beneath his boots. Yet there was no smell of fresh fire. Only decay. Ethan turned slowly in circles. He had crossed into an entirely different part of the forest without noticing. And somehow, the temperature had dropped drastically. His breath fogged in front of him. Then came the whispering. Low voices drifted between the trees. Not one voice. Dozens. He brought light. They'll smell the smoke. Too late now. Ethan pointed the flashlight wildly into the darkness. Who's there? No answer. The whispers continued anyway. The beam landed briefly on a wooden sign half buried beneath ash. Black Pine Fire Watch. Camp 14. EST 1987. The lower half of the sign had been shredded apart by deep claw marks. Ethan stared at it in confusion. There was no fire watch camp marked anywhere on his maps. A sudden metallic clang echoed deeper in the woods. Ethan flinched. Then another clang followed. Then another. Like someone striking pipes together in the distance. Slow. Rhythmic. Warning signals. He followed the sound carefully through the burned forest until he saw a dim orange glow ahead. Real fire this time. Small. Controlled. Ethan approached cautiously. An old cabin stood hidden between the burned trees. The structure looked ancient and half-collapsed, with soot-blackened walls and broken windows covered by wooden boards. A lantern hung beside the door. And sitting outside near the fire pit was an old man holding a rifle. The man raised the weapon instantly. Stop right there. Ethan froze. The old man's beard was gray and filthy, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. Thick scars covered the left side of his face. You came from the ridge? The man asked. Ethan nodded carefully. The old man looked horrified. How many saw you? I don't know what those things were. That means too many. The old man stood quickly and motioned him closer. Get inside. Now. Ethan didn't hesitate. The cabin smelled like smoke, mold, and old gasoline. Every wall inside was covered with strange symbols carved into the wood. Some looked like crude human figures surrounded by flames. Others showed tall creatures standing beneath trees. Ethan noticed dozens of radios scattered around the room. Most were broken. One still hissed with static. The old man locked the door behind them and covered the windows with heavy blankets. Then he finally looked at Ethan properly. My name's Walter. Ethan. Walter nodded slowly. You shouldn't have come here. Ethan swallowed hard. What are those things? Walter remained silent for several seconds. Finally he spoke quietly. They used to be people. A cold feeling spread through Ethan's stomach. Walter sat heavily in a chair near the lantern. Back in '87, this forest caught fire during a lightning storm. Whole mountain burned for 8 straight days. Fire crews came from all over the state trying to contain it. His expression darkened. But the fire wasn't natural. Outside, something moved near the cabin wall. A slow scratching sound dragged across the wood. Ethan turned instantly toward the noise. Walter didn't react. They come every night, he muttered. Always hunting the fire. What do they want? Walter looked directly at him. To go out. The scratching outside stopped. Then came a soft tapping on the window. Tap, tap, tap. Ethan slowly approached the blanket-covered glass. Walter grabbed his arm violently. Don't. The old man's voice trembled for the first time. If you let them see your face, they'll follow you forever. The tapping continued. Slower now. Almost patient. Ethan backed away from the window. Walter walked to the fireplace and tossed another log into the flames. The cabin brightened instantly. The tapping outside stopped at once. For a moment, everything became silent again. Then Ethan heard something that made his blood freeze. A human voice outside the cabin. A woman, crying softly. Please, she whispered. Please let me in. Ethan looked toward the door. Walter's expression turned pale. That's how they get close. The woman outside kept crying. I'm cold. Her voice sounded painfully real. Terrified. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight. We have to help her. Walter slammed his rifle onto the table. There is no woman out there. The crying suddenly stopped. Then came a loud crack from the roof above them. Heavy footsteps began moving across the cabin ceiling. Slow. Dragging. Ethan looked upward in horror. Something massive crawled overhead. The wood creaked violently under its weight. Walter quietly opened a metal box beneath the table and handed Ethan a revolver. You know how to use one? Ethan nodded nervously. Walter extinguished the lantern immediately. Darkness swallowed the cabin except for the fireplace glow. Above them the creature stopped moving. Complete silence returned. Then a long, pale arm slowly slid down through the chimney behind Walter. Its fingers were far too long. And every finger ended in human nails. Walter whispered only 3 words. Don't let it. The creature lunged out of the chimney. End of part 2. Part 3, The Burned Ones. The creature exploded from the chimney in a shower of ash and black soot. Walter fired instantly. The rifle blast deafened Ethan inside the tiny cabin. The creature slammed sideways into the wall with a wet crack, knocking shelves apart. For half a second Ethan saw it clearly. Its skin looked burned beyond recognition, charred and split open like overheated meat. Long strands of blackened flesh hung from its arms. Its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, exposing rows of human teeth packed too tightly together. And its eyes glowed orange like dying embers. The thing shrieked. The sound felt almost mechanical, like metal scraping across concrete. Walter chambered another round. Fireplace, he screamed. Ethan finally understood. The creature wasn't attacking Walter. It was crawling toward the fire. The thing moved across the floor unnaturally fast, dragging its twisted limbs toward the flames with desperate hunger. Ash poured from its body as it moved. Walter fired again. This time the bullet tore through its shoulder, spinning the creature sideways. Ethan grabbed a burning log from the fireplace and swung it instinctively. The flaming wood smashed into the creature's face. The reaction was immediate. The thing screamed louder than before and recoiled violently, smoke rising from its skin. It feared fire. Not because it hurt them. Because it kept them away from something worse. The creature scrambled backward into the darkness near the ceiling, moving like a spider across the walls. Walter's expression changed instantly. That's not good. What? Walter pointed upward. The creature had stopped attacking. Now it was staring directly at the fireplace. Terrified. Then Ethan heard it too. Something moving outside. Not one thing. Hundreds. Branches cracked across the forest around the cabin. Low screeches echoed between the burned trees. Shadows moved past the windows in every direction. Walter's face turned pale. They found the cabin. The creature on the ceiling suddenly dropped to the floor and sprinted toward the back door. It didn't attack them. It fled. The moment it disappeared outside, the forest erupted into screams. Something slammed against the cabin walls hard enough to shake the entire structure. Another impact followed immediately. Then another. Walter grabbed Ethan by the shoulder. They're coming for the fire. Help me barricade the windows. Together they shoved heavy furniture against the doors while the cabin groaned under repeated impacts from outside. Ethan risked a glance through a crack in the blanket covering the window. He instantly regretted it. Dozens of pale figures surrounded the cabin. Some stood unnaturally still between the trees. Others crawled across the ground on all fours. Their bodies looked burned in different stages, some blackened entirely, others pale and blistered like melted wax. And every single one stared at the fireplace. A loud voice suddenly echoed from outside. Human. Walter. Walter froze. The voice continued. It's me. Open the door. Ethan looked at Walter. You know him? Walter didn't answer. The voice outside became desperate. Please? They're behind me. Walter slowly approached the door but kept the rifle raised. No, he whispered. That's impossible. The voice outside laughed softly. Not normal laughter. Wrong somehow. Then it spoke again. You left me in the fire, Walter? Walter stepped backward in horror. Ethan stared at him. What is that? Walter looked sick. That voice belongs to my brother. A massive crash shook the roof above them. Part of the ceiling cracked open, raining dust and ash onto the floor. The creatures outside began shrieking louder. Walter finally spoke the truth. The fire in 1987 wasn't an accident. Another violent impact hit the cabin. Walter continued anyway, almost like confessing. There were 7 of us working the fire watch station. We found something buried deep in the ridge. A hole in the ground that breathed hot air like a furnace. The walls shook again. We thought there was volcanic gas underground. But people started disappearing. Then we began hearing voices at night. Outside, the creatures started clawing at the walls. Walter's hands trembled. My brother wanted to leave. Said the forest was cursed. Walter looked toward the fireplace. So the others locked him outside during the fire. Ethan felt cold all over. You burned him alive? Walter's silence answered the question. At that exact moment, the front door burst inward. A tall figure stumbled into the cabin through smoke and ash. Its body looked almost human. Almost. The left side of its face was burned down to exposed teeth and muscle. One glowing orange eye stared directly at Walter. The creature smiled. Still hiding behind the fire? Walter fired instantly. The bullet tore through the thing's chest, but it barely reacted. Instead, it pointed slowly toward Ethan. You brought him another one. The creatures outside began screaming louder than ever before. Then every lantern and flame inside the cabin suddenly dimmed. Walter's eyes widened in terror. No. The fireplace weakened rapidly as if the air itself was suffocating it. The burned man smiled wider. They're waking up. From deep beneath the forest floor, something enormous moved. The entire cabin trembled violently. Trees outside bent unnaturally as if something massive passed beneath the ground itself. Ethan heard it next. A sound deeper than thunder. A breathing noise. Coming from under Black Pine Ridge. The burned man whispered only one sentence. It remembers the fire. Then the fireplace went out completely. And every creature outside the cabin began rushing toward them at once. End of Part 3. Part 4, Beneath Black Pine Ridge. The creatures hit the cabin all at once. Windows exploded inward as pale bodies poured through the shattered boards. The sound was unbearable, screaming, cracking wood, claws scraping across walls. Walter opened fire immediately. The rifle blasts lit the darkness in violent flashes, revealing glimpses of twisted faces rushing through smoke and ash. Back room. Walter shouted. Ethan grabbed the revolver and sprinted after him through a narrow hallway as the cabin collapsed behind them. A burned creature lunged from the darkness. Ethan fired instinctively. The bullet tore through its jaw, spinning it sideways into the wall. The thing kept moving anyway, dragging itself forward with broken arms while black liquid spilled across the floorboards. Walter slammed a heavy steel door shut behind them. Instant silence followed. Only their breathing remained. Ethan stared around the room in disbelief. It wasn't a storage room. It was a bunker. Old generators lined the walls beside shelves filled with fuel cans, emergency radios, maps, and stacks of handwritten journals. Dust coated everything. In the center of the room sat a massive rusted metal hatch built directly into the floor. Walter locked the door behind them with trembling hands. The creatures outside began slamming against it immediately. They'll break through eventually, Ethan said. Walter nodded weakly. I know. The old man walked toward the hatch slowly, staring at it like he feared it more than the creatures outside. Ethan looked closer. Deep claw marks covered the metal surface. Something had tried to get out. What is this place? Ethan asked quietly. Walter wiped sweat from his face. Ground Zero. Outside, the screaming suddenly stopped again. That silence terrified Ethan more than the noise ever had. Walter opened one of the journals and handed it over. These were written during the fire. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting. Day 2, Voices Beneath the Ridge. Day 4, Miller disappeared near the crater. Day 5, Fire no longer spreading naturally. Day 6, The dead are walking in the trees. Ethan looked up slowly. This can't be real. Walter laughed bitterly. That's exactly what we said. A loud metallic bang echoed beneath the floor. Both men froze instantly. The hatch moved slightly. Something underneath had hit it from below. Ethan stepped backward. Walter grabbed the lantern and knelt beside the hatch carefully. "There's a tunnel system under the ridge," he explained. "Old mining routes from the 1930s. During the wildfire, the ground collapsed and opened something deeper." Another bang. Harder this time. Walter's voice lowered. "We thought the fire woke it up." "What is it?" Walter looked genuinely terrified. "I never saw the whole thing." Outside the bunker door, faint whispers began again. "Soft. Human. Walter." Ethan turned toward the sound. More voices joined in. Dozens. Some crying. Some laughing softly. One voice sounded exactly like Ethan's dead father. Ethan's blood froze. "No." The voice came again from outside the door. "Ethan, open the door." Walter grabbed him violently before he could move. "Don't listen to them. How do they know my name? They get inside your head." The whispers grew louder. Now Ethan heard another voice. His ex-girlfriend Claire. The same voice he hadn't heard in 3 years. "You left me alone?" Ethan backed away from the door, horrified. "This isn't possible." Walter pointed toward the hatch beneath them. "It comes from down there." The lantern flickered violently. Then every radio in the bunker suddenly activated at once. Static exploded through the room. Ethan covered his ears. Through the static came a deep sound. Breathing. Slow. Massive. The radios distorted around it like the noise itself was too heavy for the speakers. Walter whispered something under his breath. A prayer. Then the voice spoke through every radio simultaneously. The fire must return. The bunker lights died instantly. Darkness swallowed everything. A second later, the emergency generator kicked on weakly, bathing the room in dim red light. That's when Ethan noticed Walter staring at the hatch in absolute horror. The locks were glowing orange. From heat. Something below was burning hot enough to melt steel. The hatch suddenly bulged upward. Another impact hit it from beneath. This time the metal bent visibly. Walter grabbed a fuel can immediately. "We have to seal it again." "How?" "Fire." Ethan finally understood. The creatures feared fire because the flames trapped whatever lived underground. The wildfire in 1987 hadn't created the horror. It had imprisoned it. And when the fire ended, the things beneath Black Pine Ridge escaped. A deafening roar erupted from under the hatch. Not human. Not animal. The sound shook dust from the ceiling and knocked tools from the shelves. Outside the bunker door, the creatures started screaming again. Not with hunger. With fear. Walter quickly poured gasoline around the edges of the hatch. His hands shook uncontrollably. "It's waking up faster this time." Ethan aimed the revolver at the bulging metal. "What happens if it gets out?" Walter stared at him silently for several seconds. Then he answered. "It reaches the towns." The hatch exploded upward. A wave of unbearable heat blasted through the bunker. And from the darkness below, something enormous opened its eyes. 2 burning orange lights stared up from the tunnel beneath them. Far too large to belong to anything human. Walter dropped the lighter. And the thing below the hatch smiled. End of Part 4. Part 5, The Last Fire. The thing beneath the hatch began climbing upward. At first, Ethan could only see fragments of it through the darkness below. Massive burned limbs scraping against the tunnel walls, glowing cracks spreading across charred skin like molten lava beneath stone. The bunker temperature rose instantly. Sweat poured down Ethan's face as the metal shelves around them groaned from the heat. Walter finally snapped out of his terror. "Light it," he screamed. Ethan grabbed the fallen lighter from the floor and ignited the gasoline surrounding the hatch. Fire exploded across the bunker floor. The creature below roared violently. The sound shook the entire mountain. Flames surrounded the opening, forcing the thing back into the tunnel beneath them. Ethan caught a clearer glimpse this time, and instantly wished he hadn't. The creature wasn't just large. It was fused together. Dozens of burned human bodies twisted into one massive shape beneath the earth. Arms stretched from its torso at impossible angles. Faces emerged from melted flesh, silently screaming from inside its body. And at the center of the mass, a single enormous mouth opened slowly in the darkness, filled with glowing embers instead of teeth. Walter backed away from the fire, breathing hard. "It fed on them," he whispered. "The fire crews, the missing hikers, everyone." The flames around the hatch burned brighter for several seconds. Then they started shrinking. Too fast. The thing below inhaled deeply. And the fire bent downward toward it. Like the flames themselves were being swallowed. "No," Walter whispered. The creature fed on fire. That was the truth. The wildfire years ago hadn't imprisoned it forever. It had made it stronger. Every flame, every forest fire, every burning body. It consumed all of it beneath Black Pine Ridge. The bunker lights burst one by one overhead. Darkness spread again. Outside, the creatures started screaming louder than ever. Not attacking. Calling to it. Ethan grabbed Walter's arm. How do we stop this thing? Walter stared at the burning hatch with hollow eyes. There's only one way. He pointed toward a rusted fuel tank connected to old underground fire control pipes. Ethan immediately understood. If that explodes, the entire ridge burns. Ethan looked toward the tunnel beneath the hatch. The creature was climbing again. Faster now. Burned arms clawed over the edges of the opening while dozens of glowing eyes opened across its body. Walter loaded the final shells into his rifle calmly. You need to leave. I'm not leaving you here. Walter gave a tired smile. I already died here in 1987. The bunker door behind them suddenly exploded inward. The burned creatures flooded inside. Pale bodies rushed through smoke and darkness, climbing over each other to reach the hatch. But they weren't attacking Ethan or Walter. They were trying to hold the thing below down. The creatures feared it more than death itself. One by one they threw themselves into the fire around the hatch, screaming as flames consumed them. The giant thing below roared in rage. Walter shoved a road flare into Ethan's hands. There's an emergency tunnel behind those shelves. It leads outside the ridge. Ethan shook his head. We can both make it. No. Walter chambered a shell into the rifle. If nobody stays behind, it follows you out. The bunker floor cracked violently. Huge burned fingers wrapped around the hatch opening. The thing was forcing itself upward now. The creatures trying to stop it were crushed instantly beneath its massive limbs. Walter aimed the rifle directly at the fuel pipes. You run when I shoot. Ethan stood frozen. For one horrible second, he realized Walter had known this would happen eventually. That's why he stayed in Black Pine Ridge all these years. Not to survive. To guard the fire. The creature finally pulled part of its body into the bunker. The walls blackened instantly around it. Every radio in the room activated together. And all the voices Ethan had heard in the forest spoke at once. Let us out. Walter looked at Ethan one final time. Then he smiled weakly. Keep the fire burning. He fired. The bunker exploded. Ethan barely reached the emergency tunnel before the blast wave threw him forward into darkness. Behind him, fire swallowed the entire mountain. The roar that followed didn't sound human. Or earthly. The emergency tunnel collapsed as Ethan crawled upward through smoke and dirt. The heat behind him felt like standing beside the sun itself. Then suddenly, cold night air. Ethan burst out of the mountainside and rolled onto wet earth beneath the forest sky. Behind him, Black Pine Ridge burned. Towering flames consumed the trees as the mountain shook violently. Burning creatures ran through the woods screaming before collapsing into ash. And beneath it all, something enormous screamed from under the earth. The sound echoed across the entire forest. Then silence followed. Hours later, rescue helicopters arrived near sunrise after hikers reported seeing the wildfire from miles away. But when authorities searched the ruins of Black Pine Ridge, they found no bunker, no tunnel, no bodies. Nothing except burned forest stretching for miles. Ethan tried telling them what happened. Nobody believed him. Until 3 weeks later. Back home in Oregon, Ethan woke around 2:13 in the morning to the sound of static coming from his camera bag. His satellite radio had somehow turned itself on. Through the crackling noise, a familiar voice whispered softly. Ethan. Walter. Ethan's blood turned cold. Then another sound followed beneath the static. Breathing. Massive. Slow. And deep underground. End of part 5. If you enjoyed this story and want more wilderness horror stories tonight, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and comment. Keep the fire burning.